Julia Roberts knew the moment she walked onto the view stage that this conversation wouldn't stay soft for long. She'd been booked to talk about her new foundation for women's education, something she'd poured her heart and millions of her own dollars into. She'd done the prep. She'd told her publicist she wouldn't go near politics. She trusted that Whoopi Goldberg, of all people, would respect that. The lights went up. The applause was warm. For the first few minutes, it was all smiles and small talk. Whoopi Goldberg leaned in first, her tone sweet enough for the cameras. Whoopi said, "We're so glad to have you here, Julia. You've always been a champion for women's rights. Tell us what you're doing now with your schools for girls." Julia smiled, her hands folded loosely on her lap. Julia said, "Thanks, Whoopi. We've built 3 new campuses overseas, we've funded teacher training, and we're creating scholarships for girls who'd never have a chance otherwise. It's the proudest work I've done." The audience clapped, some people on their feet. Sarah Haynes added a soft question to keep the mood bright. Sarah said, "It's amazing you've kept this going for so long. What's the biggest lesson you've learned?" Julia answered easily. Julia said, "That real change doesn't come from photo ops. It comes from showing up when nobody's watching." The applause was louder this time. But behind the desk, Whoopi's eyes glinted with something that didn't match her grin. Whoopi said, "Showing up. That's a good point. So let's talk about showing up. You've stayed mostly quiet lately, while the world feels like it's burning. Some people say a voice like yours could do more." Julia's smile froze for a heartbeat, but she recovered. Julia said, "I've never stayed quiet about what matters. I've just chosen to work instead of talk." Whoopi's voice got sharper, just a sliver, but enough to turn the temperature in the room. Whoopi said, "But talk matters, too. Words matter. Look at what's happening with women's rights in this country right now. With the court fights, the bans, the protests. People want to know where you stand." Julia's eyes flicked to the studio lights, then back to Whoopi. Julia said, "I stand with the women fighting for their freedom. I stand with the people who risk everything to build something better." Whoopi leaned back in her chair, folding her arms like she was saving up her next move. Whoopi said, "Funny you say that, because there's been chatter, maybe you've heard it, that you like to stay in the safe lane. That you're all smiles and schools, but you won't touch the real fights." The audience murmured, that awkward ripple when people know the gloves are about to come off. Julia's hands tightened around her mug. Julia said, "What do you call funding girls' education in countries where girls can be killed for going to school, Whoopi? Safe." Whoopi shrugged, her grin thin. Whoopi said, "It's noble work. Nobody's denying that. But here, at home, what do you say to women here who feel abandoned when people with your platform don't show up loud enough?" Julia's tone didn't rise. If anything, it sank lower, an edge under velvet. Julia said, "I say enough with your lies." The whole room froze. Sarah Haynes turned her head so fast her earpiece nearly popped out. Whoopi blinked. Whoopi said, "Excuse me?" Julia leaned forward just slightly, her eyes locked on Whoopi's. Julia said, "You want to talk about showing up? Let's talk about what you do with this seat every day. You sell fear. You sell outrage. You make people believe the only power they have is shouting at a screen." Whoopi's grin fell away, the silence turning heavy, like the walls were closing in around the table. The audience sat on the edge of their chairs, waiting to see what the sweetheart would do now that she'd dropped the mask. And Julia Roberts wasn't done yet. The hush around that table felt heavier than any studio lights. Julia Roberts hadn't raised her voice, but every syllable clung to the air like static. Whoopi Goldberg's laugh came out clipped, her eyes narrowing just enough for the cameras to catch. Whoopi said, "So now I'm the problem, Julia? Not the people writing the laws, but me, sitting here trying to talk about them." Julia didn't flinch. Julia said, "You're not trying to talk about them. You're trying to sell a show." Sarah Haynes glanced from Whoopi to Julia like she wanted to melt into her chair. Sarah said, "Julia, maybe we can keep this." Julia turned just slightly, her eyes softening for Sarah. Julia said, "Sarah, I love you, but some things don't need to be kept polite anymore." Whoopi leaned forward, her grin gone, her tone cutting sharper than any joke. Whoopi said, "You think you know more than me. You think because you build some schools you get to tell me what the fight looks like? Julia's voice dropped lower, the calm somehow more dangerous than if she'd shouted. Julia said, I don't pretend to know everything. I know what I see. And what I see is people waking up every morning to fear you feed them, because you never give them anything real to hold on to. The audience gasped, then half applauded before looking around to see if they were allowed to. Whoopi's hand slammed onto the table. Whoopi said, You're sitting on this stage because I made space for women like you. Don't forget that. Julia's eyes narrowed just a fraction. Julia said, You made space for the show, not for the truth. Sunny Hostin cut in, her lawyer voice calm but cold. Sunny said, Julia, that's unfair. Whoopi's been on the front lines of these debates for decades. You can't stand there and… Julia turned to Sunny, her tone soft, but her words landing like a hammer. Julia said, No. What's unfair is scaring people into thinking shouting is enough. That rage is the only thing that works. That if they don't scream every day, they're failing the fight. The audience stirred. Some clapped, some stayed frozen. The stage manager whispered into his headset, but nobody dared call cut. Whoopi's mouth curled into something between a snarl and a smirk. Whoopi said, So what do you want, Julia? Everyone to just light candles and hope it all works out. Julia leaned in so close the camera angle had to shift. Julia said, I want people to remember they can do more than watch you scream into this table. They can organize. They can vote. They can get their hands dirty instead of scrolling and panicking. Sarah's voice broke through, almost pleading. Sarah said, Julia, you're saying people should stop caring? Julia turned back to her, her face softening again. Julia said, No. I'm saying the caring is real. But the fear they're fed every morning, that's the lie. That's the circus. Whoopi's eyes flashed. Whoopi said, And you think you're better than this show? Julia's voice was calm, and that calm was the knife. Julia said, No, Whoopi. I think the people watching deserve better than this show. The gasp that went up felt like it could knock the table over. A few audience members clapped, louder this time. A couple stood up. And in that quiet swirl of tension, the truth sat there on the table, no one knowing what to do with it now that Julia had said it out loud. But Julia was not finished. The hush didn't break right away. The audience seemed frozen between shock and applause, half afraid the moment would get swept under the rug, half hoping it wouldn't. Whoopi Goldberg's face went stone cold, the smile long gone, her voice like a blade dulled from too many battles, but still sharp enough to cut if you got close. Whoopi said, You want to come here and act like you're above this. You think sitting on your movie money and building schools makes you better than people who show up every day, fighting for what's right. Julia Roberts didn't flinch. She leaned forward so the cameras caught every word. No place for the editors to cut around it later. Julia said, No, Whoopi. It doesn't make me better. It just makes me honest about who I am and what I'm not. Sarah Haynes shifted in her chair, whispering to a producer just off stage. But the stage manager waved her down. The control room knew they were sitting on a clip that would run for days. Whoopi's laugh came out as a single, bitter note. Whoopi said, You've got a lot of nerve. Coming here and talking down to me like you know what this job costs. Julia's eyes softened for half a heartbeat, but only enough to twist the knife the right way. Julia said, You know what's sad, Whoopi? You used to be the one reminding people they were stronger than their fear. Now you're the one making sure they stay scared enough to keep watching. The gasp from the audience was immediate. A smattering of applause tried to break through, but the tension swallowed it. Sunny Hostin jumped in, her voice sharp, trying to rescue the table. Sunny said, So what, Julia? We just stop warning people? Pretend everything's fine. Julia turned to Sunny, gentle, but unshakable. Julia said, No. We tell them the truth. The whole truth. Not just the part that sells ad breaks. We remind them that shouting is not the work, showing up is. Whoopi's hands pressed flat on the table. Her jaw set so tight you could see the muscle flick in her cheek. Whoopi said, You come here to sell your charity. You want these people to love you for it. But you can't stand that I'm willing to say what you won't. Julia's voice dropped so low the front row leaned forward to hear it. Julia said, Enough with your lies, Whoopi. Sarah closed her eyes. Sunny exhaled through her nose. The audience waited, because everyone could feel there was no coming back from this one. Julia said, "People at home don't need more fear. They need more courage. And that doesn't come from you scaring them into watching another segment." Whoopi snapped, her voice brittle with rage. Whoopi said, "You think you're so brave. What do you think you just did here, Julia?" Julia leaned back, her eyes clear as glass. Julia said, "I did what you forgot how to do, Whoopi. I told the truth, without caring who claps for it." She pushed her chair back slowly. No sudden storm, no slammed mic, just that calm, final line that made the whole table feel smaller than the truth she'd just laid bare. Julia said, "You want your headline? Here it is. I'd rather build one real thing than sell 10 fake outrages." She stood, the audience breaking into a messy mix of gasps, claps, and stunned silence that no one could clean up fast enough. Whoopi said nothing. Julia looked around the studio, that familiar smile flickering back just once, and walked out. This is Elite Talk Show. Subscribe if you believe truth isn't a show, it's a choice. Subscribe if you believe fear only wins when we keep buying it. Subscribe because sometimes the strongest line is the one that breaks the spin forever. Enough with your lies.